There are obviously lots of reasons why cloud first became such an overwhelming trend. And a lot of that was around the agility that enterprises got by moving their workloads into the cloud, right? The ability to spin up capacity when they needed it, to test and evaluate new ideas, develop new products, and spin that down. When you've got a fixed footprint in a data center and fixed capacity that you've paid for 5 years or whatever, you don't have that flexibility. So that was great. But times have changed now in terms of how we can mimic a lot of the value propositions of public clouds and do that in a private cloud, private data center. Technologies like Kubernetes help us to do that really weren't well established 5 or so plus years ago.
Enterprise cyber and AI storage leader Infinidat delivers the utmost technical and business value for your enterprise. Find out why 28% of the Fortune 50 use Infinidat solutions to solve their most difficult issues at infinidat.com. Welcome back to another episode of Data Protection Gumbo. Super excited to be back once again and to have a brief conversation around some of the trends around reshaping data protection in 2025. And I have the pleasure of speaking with Mark Cusack, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Yellowbrick Data. Let's start off, Mark, with what is Yellowbrick Data? Just give us some information about the company and then a little more detail around yourself.
Yeah, hi, Demetrius. Thanks for having me on the show. Yeah, so Yellowbrick is a database company. So we provide an SQL database platform for some of the largest enterprises on the planet, actually. Many of our customers are financial institutions, insurers, telcos, governments, some cloud startups. But what they have in common is they're typically modernizing old data warehouses with Yellowbrick. They have a lot of private data typically, so they want Yellowbrick to run either on premises or inside their own cloud account. So that way they keep the control of the data and avoid giving it to someone else. So that's essentially what we do. We've been around for around 10 years, so we're pretty well established in the market. We're based out of Mountain View in California, but we have customers across the globe and development centers in the UK as well as in the US.
So we're talking about trends, right? So I don't know how far back we want to go. But there has definitely been a lot of changes that has happened. And you mentioned databases. And I remember when there were only traditional databases around. And then we rolled into, I want to say, open source databases. And because MongoDB, Couch, Cockroach, all those different names, they rolled on the scene maybe less than 10 years, if I'm correct. Can't remember. You might be able to correct me. But what have you seen overall, just from the traditional database to more of where we are right now with the way databases are more of an open source technology and also data warehousing?
Absolutely. So first of all, actually, Yellowbrick isn't open source, but we adhere to open standards. And the open standards we follow is Postgres SQL, which of course is pretty much the most popular open source database on the planet. Okay. What we make sure is that customers that use Yellowbrick can use all of their ecosystem of tools that work against Postgres and know that they'll work against Yellowbrick. Now, Postgres is a generalist in a sense. It's used for both kind of what you'd call online transaction processing, OLTP, and a little bit of OLAP, which is more of the kind of analytics side of the house where data warehousing use cases live. But the struggle that many of these kind of open source technologies like Postgres have is when they deal with analytics at massive scale or the need to be scalable. Okay, so it's great when you're handling a few gigabytes of data, but when you're pushing that threshold into terabytes of data under management or even petabytes, then a lot of these tools struggle. And I think the other thing you have to remember when you think about open source is great if your time isn't very valuable. You need an enterprise solution that you can put it in a business critical use case and know that you have the support and backing. That thing's going to stay up 24/7 and you've got support to fall back on. So I think that's a big distinction to make. But you're quite right. The landscape has shifted probably over the last 15 or 20 years towards more open source solutions. And they do have their strengths. But as I say, when you start to get into business critical kind of areas, that's where you find some of the failings.
Okay. And are you familiar with the phrase, own the base and rent the spike?
Yes. And so I think if you take a step back, this is really to do with what we're seeing in trends in terms of cloud adoption. I
Okay.
think 5 years ago, the mantra coming from CIOs, CTOs, and so on, and a lot of people in enterprises was cloud first. We want to move all of our, not only our data warehousing and analytics workloads, but a lot of our infrastructure that was traditionally managed in our own data center. We want to move that to a public cloud and effectively burn the ships, right? Close our own data centers, just run everything out of there. Cloud is the future. And I think what we've seen is a trend to rethink that, to move somewhat away from the cloud first mentality, more to cloud optimized, okay? Which means that we're struggling with rising cloud costs in public cloud. We're locked into a particular cloud vendor. We're getting hammered on our monthly spend. Perhaps we should think about which workloads should go where from a cost perspective, but also from other perspectives as well. And so this whole term of own the base and rent the spike really comes around the thinking that, well, actually, often at times it's more cost effective to take continuously running workloads that run 24/7 and move those to my own hardware, running my own data center or colo or private cloud, and leave the spiky workload that's more of an on-demand in character and leave that in the cloud for when I need additional capacity that I might not have in my data center. So that's what we mean by own the base and rent the spike, if that makes sense.
Okay, because that sounds more like a best of both worlds, right? You want to kind of shift your environment to give the business the best value and to also help resolve whatever challenges or issues that customers may be having so they could get fast access to their data and also it won't cost them a fortune. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
There are obviously lots of reasons why cloud first became such an overwhelming trend. And a lot of that was around the agility that enterprises got by moving their workloads into the cloud, right? The ability to spin up capacity when they needed it, to test and evaluate new ideas, develop new products, and spin that down. When you've got a fixed footprint in a data center and fixed capacity that you've paid for 5 years or whatever, you don't have that flexibility. So that was great. But times have changed now in terms of how we can mimic a lot of the value propositions of public clouds and do that in a private cloud, private data center. Technologies like Kubernetes help us to do that. We really weren't well established 5 or so plus years ago. So there's been a technology shift that allows us to get a cloud-like environment in our own data center and get all the benefits of owning the base, if you like, buying cheaper off-the-shelf hardware on our terms as a large enterprise to run these continuous workloads. So I think that's part of the kind of change in mindset that we're seeing.
Yeah, all great points there. And just moving into the whole data sovereignty and some of the localized cloud solutions that not customers, but individuals have to look at, right? And companies have to look at, right? Because regulations are tightening. We're not going to see that stop anytime soon. We're also seeing businesses being forced to keep data within their national borders. So how does this impact companies, especially those that are operating globally, Mark?
Yeah, I speak to a lot of customers and folks in the industry that tell me that the data sovereignty laws around the world are getting stricter and stricter. Data must be retained within a country's boundaries. And so this actually raises other questions and other drivers towards more of this, what we call a hybrid cloud setup, where you have your data and your workloads spread across a mix of on-prem and public cloud. And this is very much the trend that I'm seeing a lot of our customers adopting. And one of the reasons for this is public clouds do not necessarily have regions that span your country. Particularly if you look at in Africa or the Middle East and some parts of Asia, there's a lack of coverage there. And so individual countries there are thinking, I need to open my own co-located capacity in my own data centers to to support this data sovereignty law, because they know that there'll be punitive sanctions upon them if they breach those sovereignty rules and don't retain that data within the boundaries of their countries. So I think that's a part of the trend, is exactly where the public clouds allow you to deploy this data.
And this is not a trick question at all. I'm just curious. Have you heard of DORA? Digital Operational Resilience Act?
I'm aware of similar kind of regulations in the US and proposals to really, because the folks like the SEC are concerned about the systemic integrity of the financial system. They want to know that banks are not putting all their eggs in one basket with one cloud vendor, for example. They're concerned about what happens if all the banks had all their infrastructure in one cloud vendor and that cloud vendor becomes unavailable. What are the systemic risks that come around with that?
Yeah.
It sounds like it's a very similar sort of approach, where you've got to have blended approach, which is exactly what hybrid cloud provides, a blended approach that allows you to ensure your infrastructure is going to be always available and not held hostage to the whim of any particular cloud vendor or any problems that a single point cloud vendor has.
Yeah, and you mentioned Kubernetes earlier, right? And some companies still may not be able to spell Kubernetes. I would hope not, and I would hope that they have started at least rolling it out and testing it, right, in their dev and test environments or whatever. But what do you think are some of the misconceptions that may be holding companies back from getting into those types of technologies like Kubernetes?
Yeah, there are misconceptions and there are actually truisms around the complexity of Kubernetes. For folks who don't know, of course, Kubernetes is essentially an orchestration framework for containerized software. So it provides almost like a cloud-like operating system in which you can deploy container-based implementations of software where all the dependencies are contained within those containers. And then it provides the compute on demand, the resilience, the ability effectively to take your Kubernetes containerized application and port it between different public clouds as well. And that's something that we've done at Yellowbrick. And so our software runs in AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud on those services' native Kubernetes implementations. It also runs in our own hardware appliance in a customer's data center. So we have the best of both worlds in that hybrid approach that we mentioned earlier. But Kubernetes, you can get down to a lot of command line hacking of Helm charts, of kubectl commands, and it can be quite daunting to manage kind of a large Kubernetes deployment. I would say the cloud vendors and their managed offerings around EKS, AKS, and GKE have gone a long way to reduce the barrier to entry there, but there's still the need for skills to manage this stuff. What I would say, though, it's incumbent on software vendors that build their software on top of Kubernetes to abstract those details away from the end user. Our customers are interested in our data warehousing capabilities. They're not interested in the implementation details like Kubernetes, right? Yeah. So what we've done is effectively provide Mask, an API above Kubernetes and a user interface above Kubernetes, where we do within our software the Kubernetes management, installation, through life support. The customers aren't aware of that level of detail. So as I say, I think we want to get the benefits of Kubernetes, but not expose the complexities to end users who A, don't care about it, B, probably don't have the skills because it's fairly difficult to hire for those. And so we must help our customers unlock the value of Kubernetes without frightening them.
Okay, so you've built your platform, right, within all three major vendors, cloud vendors. And so you say you've orchestrated away the complexities of, I guess, having to manage a Kubernetes cluster. Give us a little more information about how your platform works, how it makes it easier and simpler. And so we're talking data warehouse, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Can you explain that for the audience here?
Yeah. So if folks don't know what a data warehouse is, it's typically the store of your historical transactional data within your enterprise, within your company. Okay. So you typically have operational systems. You can imagine a bank, a transactional system that's worrying about making sure your balance is correct when you take money out of your ATM or pay money in, for example. So those transactions that are altering your balance or changing your balance might ultimately end up in a historical store that tracks and over many years all of your financial transactions or all your purchases online or something like this. And it does this for lots of different systems, and it integrates this data together with information about you as a customer. So what you have then is a 360-degree view of your customer base and their activities that you can run analytics on to provide new insights and forecasting around what are the trends we're seeing across our customer base. That's just one example of how data warehouses are used, but that's essentially the use case that Yellowbrick's technology delivers. So yeah, and in terms of how we work, we are an SQL database at heart, like many data warehouses. We look and feel like Postgres from the outside, but inside we're very different. We're a scalable platform that utilizes Kubernetes to allow us to scale out compute independently of the storage layer. That's a really important point here in terms of scalability. And we can do this elastically. That means as more and more of your customers of an enterprise's business analysts get on to run reporting at the end of the month, that maybe they're doing end of month closing or doing sort of some kind of ad hoc analysis with your data. As more and more users come onto the system, we can provision new capacity elastically to help them make sure they do their job on time and get the results they need when they need them. And Kubernetes enables that effectively.
Okay. Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about the number one buzzword, AI. It's everywhere. And also, so I guess instead of running these models in-house, instead of also maybe using something like OpenAI or whatever other LLM platform that you're using,
Yep.
I want to get your opinion on why are companies moving toward private LLMs versus using some of these more open models that you just pay 10, 15, maybe the free platforms, right?
Yeah. And I think it's useful to tie the rise of private LLMs back through the other themes that we've talked about in the last sort of 15 minutes or so. We started off talking about the move to more of a hybrid cloud world where workloads are running on premises and some on cloud and some a combination of the two as well. And the reasons for that. We talked about data sovereignty being important, data, knowing that your data is where you need it to be from a legal perspective. And we also talked about a little bit about data gravity. I always think of you want to put your data at the point of need and where it's best placed in terms of its characteristics, whether it's continuous, spiky, or whatnot. Now, the link to private LLMs is also linked to data security and privacy, right? So there is a concern amongst the same customers that are concerned about moving more workloads on-prem, is they're concerned about if we use inference within a commercially available service like OpenAI or some of the others, then our corporate data is effectively going to be used to train OpenAI. And so there's a potential data leakage there, right? You'll start to see potentially OpenAI's models learning about your sensitive corporate data and then effectively using that to serve up results to people outside your company. So that's an incredibly serious situation. In fact, every customer of ours that I speak to that's interested in generative AI is very, very concerned about this and will not run some of these commercially available services because of that. And so there's a strong desire to understand how they can leverage all of their data within Yellowbrick and use that with generative AI to surface up new insights and help them make business decisions more effectively. So that's what we're seeing. We're talking with a lot of customers. We've done a lot of work within our product to integrate our data warehousing capabilities in with generative AI solutions using open source models that can be run locally, Meta's Llama, for example. And so we've been doing a lot of work around there. So there's a very growing trend. I think it's powered somewhat by the continuing availability of lower cost GPUs, the fact that we've got high performance CPUs and fast memory buses that mean we can actually, to some decent degree, run generative AI without using GPUs. And I think there's an opportunity, I think, and we'll see more and more of that going ahead.
We've covered a lot. And I guess what's one trend that isn't getting enough attention, but will be critical in the next, let's say, 2 to 5 years?
I do think this trend towards CPU-based inference within large language models is really interesting. You've seen a massive rise in stock prices around Nvidia, although it might not survive the news for this week, given I think they're announcing their earnings this week. But there has been in the recent past kind of a really difficulty in getting GPUs at the numbers you need to power these LLMs. So I think the trends in standard CPU vendors to build more functionality into the CPUs, to do faster matrix operations is important, getting faster memory into these systems, being able to utilize existing hardware that doesn't use GPUs and get that in on the game of performing inference. I think that's going to be an interesting trend. And I think in LLMs in general, I think we're seeing the move from dense, large models to these kind of mixture of experts, smaller models. So I think the big trend, and I'm not saying it's not getting enough attention because I think it is, will be how do we make these massive billion parameter scale models smaller and more specialized?
And one final question for you. So, college student out there, or maybe even someone that, let's say they're getting ready to graduate, or even someone that is looking to change jobs or has been laid off, what advice would you give them right now? Knowing what you know, all of your experience, where you see things headed from your perspective, what would you tell them?
Yeah, from the world of kind of data management and analytics, what I would say is I see a gap in the market still that continues around data governance within companies. One of the issues I think a lot of companies have is they expect to find a technological silver bullet to how they manage complex data across their organizations. I'm afraid it's not a technology problem alone. It's a problem about people and processes and putting proper data governance in place. So I think that as someone coming out of college, I'd be interested in what as an emerging data engineer or computer scientist do to help support these practical problems around data governance that a lot of organizations have. I'd also say that I come from a classic kind of SQL world. The SQL language has been around as the kind of lingua franca of databases for 40, 50 years now,
Right.
and it's not going away at all. There's still a gap in the market for people that have strong SQL skills, are interested in working in data lakes and data warehouses. And so that's still a growing area of need.
So I guess is the next stage, instead of a data warehouse, a data lake, maybe a data ocean? Someone hasn't used that term yet.
Perhaps not, but I think that oceans are quite frightening, and even lakes are quite frightening as well. Because so I think actually it goes back to the kind of data governance thought I had earlier, which is a lot of people are dumping data in a lake without any real true understanding of the quality of that data, how it's integrated, and how we're going to use it effectively. And it's a big gap.
And you got to protect that lake too, right? You just can't. Yeah, we can go on and on about this as well, but maybe one final shout out, some information around Yellowbrick Data. How can they access your website? And I don't know if you have any free trials out there or any other details you would like to share with the Gumbo listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So yellowbrick.com is the website for all the information about the product, our customers, use cases, case studies, etc. You can access a 30-day free trial of the product. It's a really easy install. It installs straight into your cloud account. So we don't offer Yellowbrick as a service like Snowflake does, or BigQuery or some other sort of folks in the market. This deploys straight in your cloud account, which speaks to the data sovereignty, the security, and all of those other themes. You own your own data at every point. So it's easy to get started with Yellowbrick in the cloud.
Thanks for having you on. I really appreciate this conversation. And I don't have data warehouse and SQL conversations often, and data management is a very important topic, especially where we're sitting right now, just in the entire geopolitical landscape of who's in office right now and what's happening, what's going on. Who knows, right? The next month or 2 or 3, there's so many changes happening. But I doubt that data management, Data is going to continue to explode and grow. More people are going to continue to store data in data warehouses and still need the skill set to manage all of that information, because I don't think AI is quite there yet, and still going to need us around to help from that perspective. So Mark, thank you so much for spending time with us here on Data Protection Gumbo. One more thing before I let you go. Listeners and the audience out there, we are on YouTube. So check us out, Data Protection Gumbo on YouTube. And then if you want to be a part of similar conversations like the ones we're having here, we have 26,000 people in our LinkedIn group called Backup and Recovery Professionals. So once again, Mark, thank you so much for being a guest here.
Thanks, Demetrius.